Katalaris, school children are currently being given information and told through...
Indoctrinated, I think is the word.
You can use the word indoctrinated, that cannabis is in fact detrimental to the health, especially the mental health, and they should not be touching it. Can you explore that a little bit more?
Sure.
What are the benefits and the positives around cannabis that are not being told?
Firstly, THC, or the main cannabinoid in cannabis, THC, certainly has some acute effects, especially in higher doses. I mean, naive users can have anxiety, tachycardia, short-term memory loss and things like that. It's been found that over the last 30 years, by selective breeding, for commercial reasons, most of the CBD in cannabis has been bred out to almost zero, and these effects are the effects of THC unbalanced by even a small amount of CBD to moderate.
Is that by human manipulation?
Yeah, by human for commercial reasons. Because of the prohibition, the cannabis has to have maximum return for the dollars that are invested in it, and so the breeders have gone for the more bang for your bucks approach, with detriment to the balance of the cannabis. That's the first thing, right? The second thing is, in 1950s, for instance, the rate of schizophrenia in Australia and America and anywhere was about 1% of the population. At that stage, less than 1% of the population was smoking cannabis. It was reserved to musicians, artists, bohemians and things like that. In the 1990s and the 2000s, 20 to 30% of the population is smoking cannabis more or less regularly, and the rate of schizophrenia is still 1%. It simply cannot be a causal effect, right? Even the College of Psychiatrists no longer call it a cause for schizophrenia. The most they'll concede is that perhaps can manifest some of the symptoms at a slightly earlier age by a matter of months. That's not to say that an overdose of, or a chronic overdose of cannabis can't cause a toxic psychosis. A toxic psychosis can come about if you have too much speed or too much alcohol or even too much tobacco. It's the toxic effect of the drug, and that can occur with cannabis. But unlike proper mental illness, schizophrenia, it invariably resolves itself without treatment, right? It's usually lasts only a few weeks and the people come out of it with simple withdrawal. It's a rare thing.
Because of the interaction of other products like alcohol or other...
No, well, it could be, but I mean, in certain susceptible individuals, having too much cannabis daily over a long period of time can end up with a disjunction between their activities and sort of what we consider...
So it puts them out of balance.
Yeah, it's a toxic psychosis, that's what it's called. But that's not the same as schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a severe recurrent brain disease. A toxic psychosis is something that happens briefly and is gone. It's like drunkenness. It's gone when you're sober. Right? So that's a distinction. And they've been playing on that to obfuscate and confuse the issue of the issues with cannabis. Right?
So why would they do that?
Well, why did they have a prohibition? I mean, you'll have to watch our film $1 Billion Crop to see the answer to that. Right? The drug effects of cannabis has always been a smokescreen for the prohibition of the industrial uses, the food and fibre uses. It's very clear when you study history in the 1930s, they dreamed up the dangers of cannabis to get rid of industrial hemp, to bring in the Marijuana Transfer Tax Act in 1938. That's very clear.
Well, there's all the documentation around, and even newspaper articles about how the Mexicans were coming up with this weed and they were going to do all these horrible things to your wife.
Well, it's not only Mexicans. Listen, cannabis is unique. In the 1930s, it was prohibited because it was meant to make people into uncontrolled sex monsters and meant to make white women want to make love with Negroes and other things like that. In the 1960s, 30 years later, when that didn't appear to be the case, they rebanned it on the fact that it sapped your libido and made you uninterested in sex. So in the space of 30 years, we've had it banned for two diametrically opposite reasons. These things can't occur by chance. This is manipulation of truth.
It was the same politician who made those two statements 30 years apart.
Yeah, Ainsley. There was a big study done in Canada by a group of psychiatrists, and they divided the population into three groups. They said never use cannabis, moderate use of cannabis, and we can talk about the definitions of that, and excessive or heavy use, or dysfunctional use is a better term, because you can't define whether it's abuse or use by the amount you smoke. For instance, Susannah, by a milligram criteria, would be an abuser because of the high doses she's using. But by the effect on her life, it's very functional use. But these psychiatrists got three groups of people, and much to the dismay of the conventional psychiatric and political community, they found that those in the middle, the moderate users of cannabis, were much more psychologically well adapted to their life and had much fewer psychosomatic symptoms. So cannabis does have a role in normal life. That's why it's been around for many thousands of years.
So when you say it has a role in normal life, how is our body able to absorb or utilise the cannabis? When you say it's a part of our daily life, how does that actually happen?
Okay. Well, thanks to the work of Mr. Mitchell in Israel, the discovery of the CB1 and CB2 receptors, but now it's becoming clear that the endocannabinoid system, that system of receptors scattered throughout the body from the head to the tail, is much more extensive than just CB1 and CB2. Right?
And CB1 and CB2 were only discovered, was it early 90s?
Yes.
So it's relatively new. This is very new.
This is a very, very new field, right? Because at that stage, the impression was we'd sorted out all the neuromodulatory effects in the body. This was a real... the fact that we've missed the biggest system, right? The one that's most widespread and probably most important, right?
So for those people who believe that this plant is so bad for us, the realisation and the scientific proof or evidence is that it is actually a part of how our body functions, the endocannabinoid system. I mean, how is that interrelated?
No. Look, that's commonly said, but I mean, just in the interest of facts, right? The endogenous cannabis, anandamide, has got no biochemical relationship to cannabis itself, right? They're very, very different molecules. Anandamide is a fatty acid derivative, and endocannabinoids, as we already said, is two terpenes joined together. They look very different, they are very different. It just so happens they both have one part of their molecule in a certain 3D configuration that can latch onto the receptors, right? I mean, it's only speculation. I mean, were we co-evolved together? You know, no one really knows. It's the same issue with opium and the endorphin system.
Is it true that in breast milk there are cannabinoids?
In the form of anandamide, yes. Well, no, look, you've got to say there's 3 different types of cannabinoids, right? Phytocannabinoids are in the plants, right? The synthetic cannabinoids, which are churning out of the laboratory all the time, and the endocannabinoids. The one in the breast milk is the endocannabinoids, the anandamide.